Okay, so the last reading for this section, uh, which is sort of on social epistemology, on sort of applied. Um, I want students to think about how they form their own beliefs and how maybe their social environment is going to inform that. I think that those are really interesting things to think about, and I hope you'll join me in thinking about some of those things. But the final essay that I assigned for you all for this unit is by another very contemporary philosopher, C. Tai Nguyen, who talks about escaping what he calls echo chambers. Um, and so Nguyen is saying that something has gone wrong with the flow of information in contemporary society, because he's saying we're finding that there are many communities that maybe used to share some sort of basic foundational beliefs about how the world works and um, just basic sort of truths that people could agree on. He's saying that now there's a number of communities that are really epistemically fragmented and that no longer share basic foundational beliefs. So I'm sure people can think of some examples of this. Politically, people often talk about living in a very divisive time and people just having really, really different perspectives on just what is basically true and false. So he credits two distinct epistemic phenomena with causing this sort of what he thinks is an increase in fragmentation around basic beliefs. And he calls these epistemic phenomena echo chambers and epistemic bubbles. And he says these two things share the qualities of both being social structures that include certain types of information and then reinforce internal sets of beliefs. So these are two echo chambers and epistemic bubbles, according to his view, are something that you can be a member of. And once you are a member or you are inside an echo chamber, then the beliefs that are going around those echo chambers, those are going to be what's reinforced for you. Okay, so he says these are similar phenomena, but they are a little different. So he says echo chambers are a social structure from which other relevant voices have been actively discredited, whereas epistemic bubbles are sort of informational networks from which relevant voices have been excluded by omission. So in echo chambers, it might be, listen, we understand there's this other point of view. In fact, we can hear it, but the feature of the echo chamber is going to be, do not trust that source. That is a false source. They're trying to mislead you, etc., etc. Whereas an epistemic bubble, you might find yourself in, and you're actually just not getting a different perspective. And so sometimes people want to talk about certain algorithms that we find on social media. So maybe you're scrolling on TikTok and your TikTok algorithm finds out that you are really into horseback riding, or you're really into video, like just like funny videos of people wiping out or something. And then your feed becomes sort of reinforces itself. So that's all you're getting. And so you're missing out on a ton of other content. I mean, those are sort of lightweight examples, but you can imagine other scenarios where, say, you're really into a certain sort of political interest, and your feed becomes only that, and so the other perspective is actually just completely missing. So that would be an epistemic bubble. So Nguyen says that, well, epistemic bubbles expose us to these limited sets of information and can falsely inflate our own confidence in our very sort of limited view or limited sets of beliefs, that epistemic bubbles are less pernicious than echo chambers because they can sort of be easily dismantled or easily shattered by simply exposing members to new sets of information that they had previously missed or not been able to access for some reason. So he's saying, listen, these epistemic bubbles, they have bad epistemic consequences, but they're easier to burst because all you have to do is expose people to relevant information. And then once they see that, they might sort of have a more well-rounded view or a less limited set of beliefs. So he says, echo chambers, on the other hand, are much less susceptible to intervention because, in a quote, exposure to contrary views can actually reinforce their view, so the internal view. So it means that members of echo chambers as epistemic communities are more likely to double down on their views when exposed to contrary information. So, what is there to do about echo chambers? This is something that he's very interested in answering. And he says the best way to escape the echo chamber is to start from scratch epistemically as much as you can. So, if you'll recall back to the first unit when we talked about Descartes and his method of doubt, in which he said, listen, I'm going to start from scratch and try to sort of find some foundational beliefs and build up from there. And the way I'm going to do this is through my method of doubt, in which I suspend judgment on any and all beliefs that I have any reason or any ability to doubt. And he even goes so far as to employ this sort of thought experiment or this idea that an evil demon could be deceiving him. And so he should doubt everything and sort of start from scratch until he can find a few things that he can be really certain of and then kind of go from there. And so Yuan says that people find themselves in echo chambers sometimes because just of the order in which they are exposed to certain information. So say you're at a fairly impressionable age, you're like on the internet and you're 14 and you find yourself watching certain YouTube videos that then lead you towards other videos that really at that point, because you were exposed to these ideas first, sort of shape in a more foundational way your worldview and then shape who you trust. And so you might find yourself then in an echo chamber just as a result of this sort of fate, this sort of roll of the dice chance situation. And so Nguyen says, well, this isn't a very logical way to form beliefs. And so what we need to do in order to escape echo chambers is to engage in what he calls a social epistemic reboot, in which one suspends all beliefs, including beliefs about who they trust. So this is the sort of social component of it. And begin by reconsidering all sources of information with this sort of new open-minded perspective, this new willingness to evaluate different types of information, still with a critical eye, but on much more equal terms, without giving preference to views that you simply were exposed to at an earlier age or just at this prior time. So I think this is really interesting. I encourage you all to sort of reflect on your own views and sort of think about the possibility of, maybe you find yourself in certain echo chambers or certain epistemic bubbles, or maybe you find people in your life seem to have really double down when they're exposed to contrary beliefs. And so you might think about what would it look like to have someone like that change their mind. So I think these are really interesting things. I think they're very relevant to the sort of social landscape that we're in currently. And I really look forward to your discussion posts.